So I'm happy that we are still together for this last panel. As again, I will quote Nemanja for the second time, die-hard supporters of this event are still with us. Thank you for that. I think this is going to be the panel where we're going to cap up this two-day meeting of ours, but also maybe talk about, I think Nenad said that there was not a philosopher at the previous table. Here there will be quite a few, so we are going to try to think about pacifism, and if pacifism is an option only in peace. I wanted to start with why the name of this panel. I mean, even though to me it sounds somehow self-understanding, but I have to start from a personal reminiscence, namely on the 24th of February, so the day when Russian aggression over Ukraine started. I wrote, it was published on that day, so I wrote the paper, it was a short piece for Serbian website Peščanik, Sandglass, very well-known one, very alternative one. A short piece called Ne ratu, No to War. And I mentioned this particularly for the reason that my friend from Kosovo, from Pristina, Ali Krasniqi, decided to translate that little piece. And I hope that I'm saying it rightly as Jo lufte, so no to war. And in that little piece, I somehow combined the words of Joseph or Joseph Brodsky, Mahmoud Darwish, Jeremiah Zephaniah, and Adorno and Brecht, basically saying that war cannot speak, that war is not able to communicate, that there is nothing rational, that there is no language in war. 2 months afterwards, at the very same website, I tried to then think about something which was then going on, and that is what happens with the position of a pacifist. I'm not sure that I would claim that I am a pacifist. I grew in a tradition of anti-militarism, so I would say I'm an anti-militarist. But it was really an interesting position at that point in time, somewhere mid-March last year. Is there a chance at all to give that perspective while the war is going on? And if not, why is that so? So it seems that in peace, it's easy for all of us to say we are for peace and we are, in a way, pacifist, or we are proponents of that kind of thought. But in war, according to some, and notably to George Orwell, that is impossible. It's either hypocritical or it has to be false. So coming from the philosophical background, I was also thinking, and this is a question for all of us today, and I think it was also a question during this whole conference or workshop, what is false about thoughts on peace? And also, is there something true about the thoughts on war? And I think that we have heard quite some expertises while we were sitting here on why something like war can and even should be justified. And then also, why then peace will come once when it comes. So, as we heard from Miruna, we are dealing with single stories very often. It was mentioned in another context, but we can transfer it in this context as well. Yesterday at the panel, second panel, we heard Tvrtko talking about the lack of vision at the moment for Europe, but also it seems to me for the world, because I think that the vision needs to be a vision of peace, because otherwise we're going to end up with sticks and stones. I think Einstein said that. So I was wondering also about the fact Eurozine, and in fact Karl-Henrik started that debate yet again, notably with Ukrainian philosophers, about what the philosophy can tell us about war and peace today. referring to a now old debate, 20 years old debate, notably between Habermas and Derrida, but there were also other, at the time, well-known figures who were thinking about why war and, in fact, why peace. Yesterday at the dinner, Olga said that we need to somehow conceive a new path, which is going to be a path of sisterhood. I would like us to definitely dwell on that one. We did not go further with that thought. I wanted to leave it for today. But we have many things on the table. I thought to leave the second part of what I wanted to say for later about the war of manifestos. And I think that we really are dealing with a certain war of manifestos at the moment, or rather last year, it was very much present with us. But also now, and the question is, how do we think if we think through manifestos only? I think it's a very important philosophical question. How do we, I don't know, build our thinking if manifestos and signatures are what speaks for us in our name, on our behalf? I think I will stop here with my introduction and maybe later on read something from those manifestos, because I know that Leandra is going to tell us a lot about that. So I will now first present. I would have loved to present all three of them in a very long fashion, because I think it's great to have first a all-female panel. I think that merits mentioning. Thanks for this little applause. But also the fact that we have such wonderful thinkers here at this table. But I will follow in the footsteps of my previous moderators and do just a very short intro. So Leandra Bias, whom we had the chance to hear with very intelligent comments all along, is a political scientist, and she works at this very point in various projects, very important European projects, and I can only say that we're going to just hear about this woman on gender in de-democratization processes and political violence. And this is a very somber topic, but then Leandra is not a somber thinker. She always also works with agency, and not just any kind of agency, but feminist agency. So what we can do about this de-democratization processes. And I know her for many years, when she was for the first time in Serbia, when she was doing a comparative research on Serbia and Russia. So I thought that there cannot be a better person coming from, this kind of German-speaking language country who can address us on these topics. She is based at the Institute of Political Science at University of Bern in Switzerland. And this is not the only prize, this is not the only award, but I really want to mention particularly this one. She was last year awarded Young Scholars Award from Walter Benjamin Colleague for her public engagements since Russia's full-scale invasion. So I think it's very important that we have a real public intellectual amongst us. She is not the only public intellectual. Paula Petričević is very much one. It's also for me not easy to speak about Paula as someone out there. I mean, it's a very, very dear friend and a sister, political sister. She presents herself as a feminist and peace activist, and I think that's something which I'm going to follow her, She's from Kotor, Montenegro, a philosopher by training and in her heart and mind. She is one of the most prominent educators, well, I would say Montenegro altogether, but also very much from the NGO, which was a sisterly NGO, Anima, Center for Women's and Peace Education. And apart from all that, she's also an ombudsperson for various media in Montenegro. And finally, last but not least, Olga Shparaga. I decided to present her, even though this is going to be a very short presentation, as a feminist and philosopher from Minsk, Belarus. She's currently residing as a philosopher in exile in Vienna as the fellow of IVM. She co-founded the European College of Liberal Arts in Minsk, where she taught philosophy from 2014 until 2021, when she had to leave Minsk after imprisonment in order to escape the trial for her oppositional activity with a feminist group she co-founded. And I think that's really an important thing to mention, because feminists can be prosecuted as well very often. And her book, which I got today in German, Surkamp, from 21, The Face of Revolution is Female, the Case of Belarus, is, I think, should be for all of us a shining example how we should think about the revolution, especially after these 2 days. So we have decided to, as we were communicating very early, so somewhere at the beginning of September, and I was very liberal and I said, do it the way you want it. I have stayed with that idea. So we are going to have small presentations. I'm not going to interrupt those presentations. And then we will talk the way we talked in the previous panels as well. We're going to start with Leandra, continue with Olga, and then give words to Paula, and then talk with one another.
Okay, thanks so much. I hope this works. Yep. And I will start with an extract from a poem, because there has not been enough literature and also not been enough Ukrainian voices yet over the 2 days. So it's a poem written by the Ukrainian feminist Oksana Potapova, and it bears the title, The Personal is International, a Letter to Western Feminists. I start. How do I tell you, my sister, that my anti-militarism, my non-violence, my pacifism have all crumbled to pieces on the morning of February 24th. The day when I replaced the word peace with freedom, non-violence with resistance, dialogue with solidarity, global with personal. What then is my theory now, you ask? Nationalism, capitalism, militarism? Those are the labels you are quick to put on me because of my choice, because of my discourse, because of my struggle. I wish I could come up with a proper ism to encompass all I have come to know through what I had to live to respond to you. But all I know now is that my theory is waking up every day and checking if Kyiv was bombed. My theory is calling my grandma to say I love her. Is that enough for a theory? Does the theory stop wars? I don't know. So far, it hasn't. But it has stopped me from giving up on this world more than a time or two. Quote ending. So undoubtedly, with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, old times and paradigms have been ruptured. In this, to use a German word that became popular, in this Zeitenwende, rupture of time, one key paradigm that has come under question is that of pacifism alongside nationalism, especially among the left and among feminists. And feminist thinkers have spent decades theorizing the nation state as not the space where women have a room of their own, but rather we theorize this as an imagined community that is built on women's financial, social, and not least also bodily exploitation and oppression. Nation states, so feminists thought, to not liberate women, but cement traditional roles. On the one hand, the male agent, the producer and protector, and on the other hand, the female passive subject, reproducer, and victim. And of course, I'm glossing over decades of feminist thinking. You'll bear with that. Crucially, we've also theorized that nation states are not built for women's security. What makes states secure often makes women and other marginalized communities more insecure and hides other specific insecurity needs. That is why it has been a cornerstone of feminist thinking to oppose militarism, the ideology of relying on coercive force to prevent and solve conflicts. And of course also the resulting policy from that ideology, which is militarization, which then usually manifests in disproportionate military spending and armament. So feminism has then by and large been thought as anti-statist and anti-militarist. So far, the theory. And that theory, and it was mentioned already in the introduction, right, has been fundamentally put into question since Ukrainians, but also Ukrainian feminists explicitly have asked for military support. And one of the most hurtful and disappointing experiences for them over the past 18 months has been the lack of understanding and solidarity from parts of the left, but also feminist sisters. And as Bohdana Kurilo writes in her recent autobiographic article, which I really highly recommend, it's some of the best pieces I have read in the past months. The article is on the Ukrainian subject and knowledge production, and I quote, Too many feminist scholars have been willfully ignorant about the oppression inflicted on Ukrainian women. Quote ending. And why so? She also theorizes because Ukrainian feminists demand freedom within the state, not from the state. And as such, their position runs completely counter to that established anti-militarist and anti-nationalist stance. And one could argue even, at least in Western Europe, to a post-nation state stance that was taken for granted. And so to me, this shows two problems with the previously established theories. They were depersonalized accounts of war, hence why I used a poem also, and they built on a fixed idea of the right type of agency. But there is another key principle in feminist theory where I think we can take hope in and bring in the bright side. And that is certainly that of agency and positionality, of the value we do accord to, or want to accord to the everyday and the embodied over the distance and the seemingly objective. And so through that, we might actually also find a reconciliation between the positions. Ukrainian feminist calls have been rejected, downplayed, called radicalized because they do not and indeed cannot emulate that accepted theoretical and ideological language that was established. And they also dare to do so as a subject the discipline could afford to ignore for a long time. And I'm speaking here also in particular for the discipline of political science. It is then about the moral obligation to question long-held beliefs, to leave our comfort zone, and to accept that there are mundane, seemingly mundane, lived experiences that disrupt profound existing theoretical certainties. Feminist thinking is once more confronted with the reality that agency has manifold manifestations and that our theories must not be exclusively built on a priori fixed conceptions of what constitutes right agency. So the answer that I put forward, or rather the thesis that I put forward to the main question of this panel on whether pacifism is an option only during peacetime, is then that it depends. It profoundly depends. And this answer will depend on one's place, on the type of war, and on whether one finds oneself on the side of the aggressor or the aggressed. And this visibly transpires in the different feminist manifestos that have been published, and I can elaborate on it now, okay, that have been published since the full-scale invasion. So to give 3 examples, immediately after the full-scale invasion, the next day, Russian feminists founded the feminist anti-war resistance movement, to which I'm going to refer from now on as FAR. and published a manifesto that clearly denounced Russia's aggression, stressed that it was a continuation of the Crimean annexation, and also said that no feminist movement could ever be on the side of war and military aggression because war fundamentally destroys human rights. In mid-March, so we're a month later, barely, an international feminist manifesto appeared with over 150 signatories with very known figures, such as Nancy Fraser, but also a lot of representatives from Latin American feminism. And maybe we will come back to that because, again, it's about positionality, which I argue, and I'll come back to why I argue that, misappropriated Russian feminists' call. It used that call, specifically quoting it, referencing to it, to equal the Russian aggression with NATO's role, and to also explicitly refuse military support for Ukraine. Why I say that there is a misappropriation is because I have since conducted interviews with activists in FAR, and they never expected this to happen. And so they very soon made a public appearance to say this is actually not what our stance is. And it has created a lot of rifts since, also being less invited to public panels since, for example. And this, I think, was a breaking point. At this, so FAR stepped out to clarify their stance, and also that they were anti-military when it came to their regime, to the Russian regime, but that, of course, they were very much in support of helping Ukraine defend itself, which wasn't maybe clear in the first manifesto. And so lastly, Ukrainian feminists felt forced to make their standpoint in June clear in a manifesto called The Right to Resist. Ukrainian feminists showed that to them, the International Feminist Manifesto was denying their agency, the right to decide what they needed and what was feminist to them at that moment, namely to fight for their bare existence. And it also, to them, breached the feminist principle, and here I come back to the initial point, to listen to those most oppressed. So whether one is for pacifism and whether one can even conceive of pacifism is a matter of positionality. And now I'll come to my last point, which is the sub-question of the panel. Does this also mean that there is no hope for non-violent mobilization against Russia's aggression? No. The FAR is a non-violent movement. And it is arguably the biggest change we have seen in the history of contemporary Russian feminism. It is well organized, it is consolidated, but also horizontal. And thus it is widespread because it allows initiatives to pop up. And it is highly visible. Whether it is taken up in the Russian liberal opposition is a different discourse. And I'll be interested to hear also the experience from Belarus here. But so by the last count, you have over 100 branches in Russia and abroad, and 23 of these branches have their own Telegram channel to coordinate activities. And what these activists have done is they have provided support for men to escape mobilization and flee abroad. They have countered propaganda by hanging leaflets about the truth in building halls. They have supported Ukrainian refugees who had to go through Russia or were abducted for that matter. And they have squared non-violent public protests with artistic interventions, such as placing memorials in backyards and public squares overnight. And they have, interestingly, I think, re-employed Soviet dissidents' tactics by creating a self-published and self-printed feminist bi-weekly newspaper, Women's Truth. And this paper takes an open anti-war stance, and as they say, it's not ashamed of being printed and shown to our mothers and grandmothers. And in Ukraine, you also see smaller examples of non-violent resistance. People have physically stopped tanks and thus the military advance in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and they have subverted occupational administration, not least by continuing teaching Ukrainian language and history, for example. And of course, they foster social cohesion, which is a profound pacifist act. And they're doing this daily as they are supporting each other. But when faced with brutal violence and missiles, missiles, I would say the theater for nonviolent performance is limited. So overall, and to conclude and come back to the overarching question, ideally, we will not again formulate an absolute answer to it when we dare reconsider our convictions, but we will be able to find a formula where we can accommodate different positionalities and lived experience that build a common, even if vulnerable, ground for feminist solidarity.
Thank you, Leandra. Maybe Olga, you take over. I have, of course, many thoughts, but let's do it as we planned.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me here. Previous discussion was very, I am impressed by previous discussion and by your presentation as well. And I have some thoughts about pacifism and how we can speak today about peace and war, because I think there is a question for all of us, and maybe we are discussing not enough all these notions, all these dimensions, and I'm fully agree that there is about different positionalities and different perspectives, and there is very important to understand from which perspective we are speaking about peace and pacifism. And I would like to propose some ideas, some thoughts about this to these topics. First, I think that there are different discourses if we speak about pacifism, and this the most usual understanding of pacifism maybe we have from the 20th century, and not from the end of the 20th century, but from the middle, from the opposition and memory of World War II. And if we think about this form of pacifism, then the idea is to get peace at any price. And there is, I suppose, there is about denying of war. We don't want to have war, and that because we need to do something to stop this war, and there is not so important how to do this and how to help people who are in this situation, in this situation of aggression. And there is not about people, person, but about these fears of war. And another part of this usual discourse of pacifism is, of course, anti-Americanism. And this is the logic of geopolitical competition. And I think that these fears of war and geopolitical competition, there is, if we speak from the feminist perspective, there is about hierarchies, about competition between big geopolitical actors. And then we have, on the one hand, hidden lack of knowledge, because we don't have, and a lot of scientists, not only people in broad public, have not enough knowledge about Ukrainians. And then we have on the one hand Russia, and then on the other hand USA, and there are these big players which we oppose, which this supporter of pacifism from 20th century are supporting. There is this big play between these big actors. And yeah, there is on one hand as conclusion lack of knowledge, and on the other hand there is about hidden hierarchies. And in this situation, if we speak about these hidden hierarchies, on the one hand we have these Western countries and Russia. They are big players, and the idea is to deconstruct this play in this contraposition, but there is not so easy. because they are still big players, and we still have this logic of geopolitical competition. And this geopolitical competition is, of course, criticized from the feminist perspective, and that because it's so necessary to speak from this perspective, to deconstruct this usual pacifism. And the first idea. The second idea, or maybe the part of this idea, is that we have counterpart to this usual pacifism. There are a lot of different notions: peace building, peace and security politics. We heard about peace infrastructure. There are a lot of different concepts, but we have this, so to say, we don't have enough this opposition of this new concept in this usual pacifism. And I would say that all these new notions, new concepts that we got from the end of 20th century and then from the beginning of 21st century, they are maybe in scientists, in some areas where this usual pacifism doesn't work. And maybe we need to bring these different notions together and to understand how we can speak from these different perspectives. But this, and we need to compare, to bring together these concepts if we want to speak about peace in another way than this usual pacifism proposes us. So, and then my second thought, what we have, why we need new concepts, not only because of this prehistory of this usual pacifism, we need new concept because we have a new situation as well. Because this war is Russian war in Ukraine, but there is a European war, war in Europe, and there is, on the one hand, liberation war in the spirit of 19th century, 20th century. On the other hand, we have a strong discourse of human rights, and that because we need to understand how we can bring this together, human rights and this liberation war. And I think that we have some concepts and some ideas, some new discourses where we can looking for the new concepts. For example, Alexandra Matvichuk, an Ukrainian human rights lawyer and civil society leader, her organization, Center for Civil Liberation, was awarded the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize. She proposed the notion, the concept of a new humanistic movement to discuss peace and war and to discuss the current situation, not to speak about pacifism. And what is the idea of this new humanistic movement? And I quote, "We need a new humanistic movement that will work with society on the level of meaning, which will focus on education, which will shape mass support and inspire people to defend rights and freedoms. This movement should bring together intellectuals and civil societies from many countries, since the ideas of freedom and human rights are universal." End of quote. And from the feminist perspective, and for me, this movement has a gender feminist dimension, because the most important right is the right to be free from the sexual violence and rape that women and children are primarily subjected to in this and all wars. And Ukrainian feminists also speak about this right and about this feminist perspective in this manifesto, The Right to Resist. This manifesto was mentioned, and I think that this new humanistic movement and engaging for this new humanistic movement maybe can help us to bring together this different understanding of peace and different concept of peace, which we have a lot of them. And my last idea is about my own perspective. I'm Belarusian as well, and Belarus is Belarusian regime, Lukashenko regime is aggressor and co-aggressor in this war. And it seems to me that pacifism may still be a strategy for Belarusians and Belarusian society. For example, we have the initiative of Belarusian feminists grounded the Union of Mothers of Belarus, which is aimed to preventing Belarusians from taking part in this war on the side of Russia. And there is an example how, this peace strategy, pacifism, like a strategy, maybe in framework of this new humanistic movement can work. And we discussed this, that these pacifistic strategies are proposed by Russian feminists as well. And Belarusian feminists are working together at some places with Russian feminists. And the main tool here in framework of this strategy is a criticism of Russian war propaganda. Because it's, we discussed in my previous panel, it was a big topic, how we can work with propaganda. And I think that peace, maybe not pacifism, but work with idea of peace and peace building, infrastructure of peace can help to fight this Russian war propaganda. And maybe what is from my Belarusian perspective is also very important for Belarusians to share the knowledge of colonial politics in our region, because we understand ourselves also like people at the borders, and we also have fears if we think about Russia, and that because it's very important to understand our positionality together with in the framework of this war, together with Ukrainians. And of course, our knowledge about authoritarianism and state violence, I think it's very important to discuss, to make visible, because there is about this human rights dimension and how we can find under very difficult conditions for human rights. And I think that sharing of these different experiences is a part of this peace understanding. There are some ideas.
So, okay, I will use my time, and just before I do so, you actually probably heard that I'm one of the few panelists who is not from academia. I am a humble high school philosophy teacher from Qatar. And the main reason that I accepted this call, that I'm really grateful for and happy to be here, is not only to gain some new perspectives and pick up some new notions and knowledges and experiences, etc., but also to, in a way, use this panel to explain to myself some issues, some problems, some anxieties that I'm facing with in identifying myself or referring to myself as Adriana put it, peace and feminist activist. So to explain myself, not only what am I doing, because I'm always asking that to myself, but also why am I doing so? So this question of Adriana's text in Peščanik, is pacifism only option in peace, rang in my head for quite a long time. And I would like to share with you some thoughts on that issue. Hasn't pacifism always been a stillborn concept, superfluous in peace and redundant in war? Although our panel is titled "Is Pacifism Only an Option in Peace?", I will strive to discuss the justification of pacifism from two perspectives. The one mentioned in the title, which concerns the question of timing, that is, the possibility of advocating pacifism in peacetime or in wartime, as well as the one that pertains to the relationship between goals and means, meaning goals or values on one hand and the means to achieve them on the other. Advocating for peace and feminism in Montenegrin context, for me, was always related to transitional justice and its gender perspective. The shame that descended upon my generation from the shoulders of our parents has not ceased to burn since the war in former Yugoslavia. 2 days ago, actually, marked the 32nd anniversary of the beginning of the siege of Dubrovnik, an enduring disgrace of the Montenegrin citizens that, as peace and feminist activists, we have a duty or obligation to remind, an obligation to Socratically challenge the amnesia-prone public of post-conflict, well, that's also debatable, post-conflict societies such as Montenegrin one. And what is interesting is that 2 days before this, let's say, anniversary, the State Prosecutor's Office of Montenegro initiated a case based on the government's information that equipment suspected of being stolen from Čilipi Airport in Dubrovnik from 1991 to 1992 was found during the inventory of Montenegro's airport property just a few days ago. It took just over 3 decades for this complex action of inventorying property and examining its origin to be undertaken. Justice is slow, to say at least. I'm old enough to remember military trucks and tanks passing beneath my balcony, heading towards Dubrovnik warfront, lifelong TV news broadcasts through which hysterical wartime propaganda poured into living rooms where the coverage was followed in solemn silence. But even then, in the streets of Kotor, my city, less than 2 hours away from the front, some people opposed the war and called for peace. That was pacifism at work within the aggressor country. It didn't stop the tanks, the destruction of the city, or the establishment of camps for war prisoners from the Dubrovnik area in Morinj, also within the Boka Bay. It alienated those who advocated for peace from the majority of their neighbors and fellow citizens and paved the way for their internal immigration. Still, as Dubravka pointed out last night, it simultaneously provided the foundation for relationships that needed to be rebuilt in the future, for confronting the future past once the guns fell silent, the camps were emptied, and the life had to heal and be rebuilt anew. Brecht's "Let others speak of their shame, I will speak of my own" is the first step in bridging the abysses that wars have dug. Pacifism is primarily a moral standpoint that opposes war, violence, and killing, whether from a deontological or consequentialist perspective. However, arguments against violence and killing are called into question when faced with physical attack and immediate danger, where no discourse or peace argument against war can preserve bare life in the moment. And that's something that Leandra talked about. However, hence, Slapshot might be correct in saying, after Adriana, that pacifism makes sense only until the war begins. Does war ultimately render pacifism redundant, or does it emphatically necessitate its advocacy? All the challenges, shortcomings, and contradiction of pacifism could be, on one hand, stemming from its struggles with time, its, let's call it, time trouble, from the moment when it does or does not make sense to advocate for peace. Can pacifism in peacetime be reduced to opposition to war, violence, and killing as means to achieve any and all goals? What is the content of pacifism in peace? And what kind of peace are we talking about? Is peace in Belgrade same as peace in Podgorica, Sarajevo, Moscow, Stockholm, or Banjska? Isn't peace, in fact, as we saw today in Nemanja's presentation, he's not here, okay, is actually peace a spectrum or scale, just as war, after all? The content of pacifism in peace, whatever the peace itself might be, would be to prevent war, killings, and violence. But the key questions for me seems to be, how much is pacifism concerned with their causes, meaning causes of war, killings, and so on? Would we consider critique of imperialism, so many times mentioned yesterday, but also today, climate change crisis and unsustainable neoliberal capitalism as pacifist practice or themes, or we only consider as such explicit anti-militarism and calls for global disarmament? If anything is to be left from pacifism in times of peace, it is to consider, analyze, and critique causes of war in the first place. On the other hand, all the shortcomings and contradictions of pacifism could perhaps be more closely tied to the question of the relationship between goals or values on one side and the means for their achievement on the other. In his now a century-old anarchist writings, Enrico Malatesta states, "We are not pacifists, because peace is not possible unless it's desired by both sides." And that is something that was mentioned these days quite a few times. "We consider violence a necessity and a duty for defense, but only for defense." But then he continues, "And we mean not only for defense against direct, sudden physical attack, but against all those institutions which use force to keep people in the state of servitude." Let's go back to one of the key questions mentioned yesterday as well. Could there be war for peace? And actually, war for peace was the cynical slogan under which Montenegrin politicians backed the Yugoslav army's campaign in Dubrovnik region. Can weapons achieve and preserve peace? Is there a peace without military preparedness to defend it? And was there ever a peace secured by different means? Or is it, as Emma Goldman put it, preparedness simply a road to universal slaughter? Does pacifism solely concern itself with the means, or does it also take into account the goals, the values that needed to be defended, whether in non-violent or a violent manner? The values that pacifism advocates for, peace, dignity, justice, first and foremost, are inseparably linked to the question and problem of how are they to be achieved, the means we use for their realization. Can a non-violent society be achieved through violent means? Or, as Ostergaard suggests, means are the ends, never merely instrumental, but also always expressive of values. Means are end creating or ends in making. So I would like, and I will finish with this, I would like to return to the question of how peace is achieved. I believe that peace achieved through war or the threat of war, so-called negative peace, is essentially a ceasefire prolonged, in which the underlying causes that led to a war still lie dormant to a greater or lesser extent. These causes do not disappear in the time of so-called peace, but are activated as needed as a tools of managing public opinion, like ghosts summoned when necessary, most often during election campaigns, the formation of post-election agreements and coalitions, or as a smokescreen or a red herring to divert society's attention from from what government is doing behind the scenes. Positive peace, on the other hand, cannot be achieved through war. It leaves wars far behind, learning from the countless repeated mistakes. Without a society's readiness to start learning from history, historical insights paid for with the blood of millions even lose their warning power. And I again quote Emma Goldman when she says, "But is it always necessary for one generation to wade through oceans of blood and heap up mountains of human sacrifice that the next generation, and maybe next generation only, may learn a grain of truth from it?" In the negative peace in which most of us live, confronting our warlike, colonial, and exploitative past as well as the present is a necessary condition for sustainable peace. A numbness in the face of horrors unfolding before us should not be forcibly coerced into delivering insights or recipes to overcome increasingly malignant crises. Perhaps that numbness is the best that we can do. There is no, and this is a quote from Adorno's Minima Moralia, there is no exit from the entanglement. The only responsible option is to deny oneself the ideological misuse of one's own existence, and as for the rest, to behave in private as modestly, inconspicuously, and unpretentiously as required, not for the reasons of good upbringing, but because of the shame that when one is in hell, there is still air to breathe. Utopian thinking of the different cannot compete with the brutal force and power of the existing, nor can it provide a universal content-specific vision of what should be. Its power is minimal, confined with a single skin, limited to individual and their position, which is primarily a moral one. And there is no more urgent call than that of reducing suffering. And to quote Adorno once again, to lend a voice to suffering is a condition of all the truth. Our present may be humanity's last future, and there is no more time for slowly maturing insights, yet this doesn't disturb us sufficiently, so pacifism remains a small, timid, and insufficiently relevant and powerful counterbalance to the madness of general mobilization, armed preparedness, and just war.
Well, I could really also stop myself after this last sentence. There's almost nothing else to be said. Yeah, but we have to continue talking. I would say even unfortunately. So let me pick up on one sentence that we heard at the first panel. In fact, it was Karl-Henrik who proposed it at the end of the session, and I would like to hear all of you and your thoughts on that one. It was at some point, as I said, at the very end, where it was said that the post-national and post-heroic Europe was somehow seen as the goal. And we can say that maybe this is the moment in which the foundations of that idea are shaken, especially because in Ukraine at the moment, we see a nation-building process on the one hand, and on the other hand, a huge heroism. And somehow we ended that panel with the idea that maybe that's good, and maybe we should think about it. What I want to say is, now this goes for all the panels, not just for this one, is that we invited the future panelists, all the participants, to choose their panels. So it was not that we invited these people to say these things, but they somehow chose also what they're going to speak about. And I think it's very important that the three feminists are given the chance to finally, you know, say something about how do you see at this point in time, shall we be going back to heroism and nation state, or are we not good with the post-national and the post-heroic? And what do we lose? What do we win if we lose? To quote our Hannah Arendt, one of our famous and favorites philosophers here. I hope I was clear. I maybe start with Leandra and.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to with which I started, right? That we were very convinced of this, like as feminists, it's about transcending or dismantling nation states, right? And now we are confronted with a reality where it's feminists themselves that fight for freedom within that nation state, and by the way, have done very critically. So I think for me, it's about also that not to go into that fallacy that there is no margin, that they are completely self-effacing and forgetting about feminist principles. Like feminists have very critically accompanied the Maidan and the heroism that came up there, how that experience was reported through a very male gaze and completely denied women's role in the revolution. And again, that's of course a militaristic component, but still an important one, how women veterans, for example, did not have any rights and any protection, and how that is yet once more a nation building, exploiting women and then forgetting them. So I think it's about stressing that there is, again, agency, feminist agency, also when a nation is being built. And yeah, for me, it eventually boils down to when there is genocidal intent, right? The intention being, I deny that that nation exists, then it can and is also a feminist act to protect that and build it. And it can be done so critically. So I no longer see it as this binary. As that, as a feminist, we have to be completely against. You have to be post-nation. Yeah.
Well, I would say that first of all, you have to be alive to be a feminist. So all the accusations of betraying some feminist principles, whatever they might be, when fighting to survive, are, in my opinion, hypocritical. But we still cannot, and we still don't know, and we will see in the future, if there is any future, the scale of unimaginable destruction in Ukraine. So it seems that even though we maybe hoped that the time that our present is post-national and post-historic one, unfortunately, with these huge backlashes and steps back, it seems that once again, to survive, to organize the society, we need heroes. And I will quote Brecht once again when he says, "Unhappy is the land that needs hero." So that's basically a truism when talking about Ukraine today, but actually it's also a good indicator of what maybe perhaps I think about heroism. And I certainly don't want it, but I hope that I won't be in position to need it.
Yeah, can I just? I'm thinking also about, you know, of course, when you are in a situation where you don't know whether you're going to have a roof over your head and floor under your feet, then you also have to be a hero in a way. But I'm also thinking, you know, what kind of identification it requires from all of us. What kind of voice should also be there around the world? this is also a little bit the story about the manifestos to which we're going to return. But can there be voices that are feminist or that are post-nationalist and I'm continuing to insist on that, and post-heroic, that are asking for a world that is not going to feed on heroism and on new nation buildings, and who knows how many new fragmentary nation buildings are in front of us. So do we have to be identified with those people who are actually suffering on the ground to ask for peace? To ask for a world which is going to be a peaceful world? That's seems to me a very important question, to which, of course, also you two can. But please, Paula.
So just a short notion. I would make a difference between identification and solidarity, empathy. So I don't have to identify with heroes or heroism or whatever. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to, in a way, be open to hear, to feel the immense amounts of pain that are not only in Ukraine and even Russia, but also in other places on the world.
There are very difficult questions, and I would like to discuss this question more, to discuss at different seminars and conferences about what we have now. Communities. If we speak about communities, do we have national or post-national communities? There is on the one hand, and on the other hand, how this, if we speak of the level of national state, how this national state coexists today, what we have. Do we have a new condition, post-national, but we have these geopolitical actors as sovereign national state? And I think that there are contradictions, because from the inner perspective, if we speak about Ukraine, about this nation building, then there is, on the one hand, like in the 19th century, on the other hand, and another way, because we have a very complex society. There is about inclusion, about human rights, about women's rights. And on the other hand, these inner processes, and there is about nation and about something more than nation. And if we speak about bigger perspective, this international solidarity between different states, there is, for me, also like a post-national condition, because there are actors, Russia, and we have new authoritarian regimes now, but we have more solidarity between different democratic states and these authoritarian states. And from my point of view, this condition is post-national. There is new condition. And how we can combine, how coexist these different conditions, there is very interesting questions. And what are our societies, our communities? I try to describe, for example, Belarusian community now from the perspective of caring practices, because this caring solidarity practice is very important, and there is about boundaries in the community. And for me, there is more than nation in this classical usual sense. And that because there are all of these are questions, of course. And heroic paradigm, I think I think that we have also different types of heroes, because during COVID, it was the notion of heroes of every day. And it was small people, first of all, women who were dealing with medical and other help. And if we compare this different type of heroes, we can understand that through this plurality of heroes, maybe we can get new notions, that there are different forms of being hero, and there is these heroes are not alone, because we see that there are communities. Now we can see that there is big communities, big boundaries, not only heroes, but these communities. And then there is a new notion of this plurality and new notion of heroes as well. And in this sense, I would develop this notion, this concept, as a new concept.
Can I maybe, it's just a detail, but I think it's an important one. When you stressed it's about communities and it's about inclusion, one thing that, and I think it goes back to this like an unease with nationalism, is that in Ukraine, what we've seen is the rise of what is termed civic nationalism. It's not ethnicity based anymore. And that, like, sociological research has really shown it comes down to what people say they identify with. And so, and something that was really then, it manifested in the platform on which Zelensky actually ran, right? And that was, this should be a state where everyone feels included and equal, no matter which religion and which language, for example, you speak, or in which region you are placed. And so I think that is very crucial to understand that not each nation and not each nationalism is also the same. So when you are against the nation state itself, then of course that's different.
Yeah, well, I have to say that I am, well, as I come from where I come from, it was very important for us to somehow to not introduce this notion of it depends. Whereas today it seems that it's very important to, as Paula said, to think of what peace or war means in various parts of not just Europe, but the earth, because the wars are happening at the moment in various parts on earth. And there is a looming danger. I hope there's not going to be war on this soil, but we were talking about that yesterday the whole day, and we are not far away from it. But I want to think with you about this, what you said, it's content related. Leandra said it depends at some point, and now she also emphasized this with not all nationalisms are the same. I'm really struggling with that. I'm struggling also from the point of view of, like, not from the political science perspective or social theory even, but from a philosophical point of view, where we want to deal with principles and we have the mind to deliver us with principles, so to say, and where it cannot depend. The principle is either or, so to say. And so we are either thinking that the war damages life, or we are somehow fine with the fact that at the point, for the moment, for this or that reason, for these or those causes, it can happen. And maybe it will then lead to a better world, or to a more stable peace, or to whatever. So from this perspective, and I was, of course, I'm thinking these days a lot about Albert Einstein's letter that he wrote to Freud, asking, how can we solve this problem? The physicist sees worlds in these kinds of boxes. How to solve this problem? How to bring peace once and for all? And I really want us to be able to think together, is there a chance for us to think this? This is what I also wrote to you. How do we make ourselves think a possibility of a world where there's going to be no war? So not better or worse, better or worse nationalism, this type of, or that type of kind of the producer of the war. Can we think such a thought? Now, in the midst of war, in Ukraine, there's Sudan, there's Banska. Paula.
First of all, I would like to make a small remark on nationalism. Of course, there are many different nationalisms. We in this post-Yugoslav region are fed up with nationalisms, and but we have to bear in mind the fact that nationalism works as a principle of mobilization for perhaps liberation, for emancipation, anything like that. And in that sense, I would maybe suggest to call that kind of temporary nationalism strategic nationalism. So that's one thing. And the other, of course, is much more difficult. Yes, every war damages life. But if we don't do anything to prevent, to resist, what are we doing then? Are we confirming the principle that anyone with enough power can do whatever they want? So is it might is right? Is it the only principle that we are left with if we say in absolutistic way war damages life? Yes, that's truism, but also that also means that we maybe will have to give up on freedom then. So we always have contesting principles and values, and we have to bear in mind the context in which we're making our decisions or thinking about our actions. I also think that we shouldn't wait to be in war. Of course, the war is always, but not everywhere, not still everywhere, okay? So we have to use this privilege of negative peace that we're in to think about the war, to think about the causes that lead to war. And for example, I will go back to the situation, if Montenegro, if I may, I will be short.
Please, don't be.
Yeah. So during the war in former Yugoslavia, and after the war is over, you had at first not so many people and organizations that were anti-war, let's say. Also political parties that were anti-war. And in the period after the, let's say, 1999, these initiatives transformed into the calls and actions for transitional justice. And even though, of course, you're never satisfied with the results, but it's not the same as it was 5 or not so many, maybe 5, but 10 or more years ago. Of course, in Montenegro, we have a backlash. We have a backlash that we don't get to justify by saying you had to do anything to move from the position of power, the party and the person who were there for over 30 years. Of course, that's like not in question. But the problem was that the politicians always use the things, the principles, the methods that works, and nationalism works. And also the only thing that was up to dealing and moving Milo Đukanović from the position of power was actually pretty archaistic, pretty, how to put it and not to sound too, I don't know, but it was, in my opinion, retrograde movement of these so-called litias, processions in the streets of Montenegro. Yes, they throw away the authoritarian leader, but they bring and put it into the public sphere and in society, unleashed actually the nationalism, clericalism, and sometimes fascism. I will just say that we were talking this morning about soft power. And in Montenegro, it is not an abstract concept. which is artificial, like maybe it is in Macedonia, North Macedonia, that we heard about. In Montenegro, we have a really serious project of this soft power of Srpski svet, Serbian world, and you have all the elements of soft power in its practices during the last 2 years, from the cultural ones, different manifestations, schools, like summer schools of Serbian language in Montenegro and so on. But also, and this is very serious, this year we got the first Orthodox high school, Orthodox gymnasium in Podgorica, funded from the budget of Montenegro. And these are the processes that take time, but these processes are changing the climate of the society in Montenegro. And just one more thing to add, also you have huge financial injections from the so many times mentioned Vučić to, for example, Nikšić municipality of 2 million euros last year. Or a year before that, I don't remember, but within the last 2 years.
Very nice. I was thinking, Olga, maybe if you wanted to go on with this question, but I also thought now that I remembered Einstein, and I remembered also what Freud said to Einstein. He was much less optimist than Einstein, but he thought that some kind of enlightenment, some kind of culture will bring the humanity out of the wars. And just to remind ourselves that the exchange took place at the beginning of the 1930s, so before the major wars that are going to ensue. I thought of culture when you also mentioned new humanistic movement, and I was thinking, haven't we done with humanism already? And are we now in need of some new humanism? What would that entail? But now this is too many questions. I'm stopping myself, please.
Yeah, of course. I thought about this as answer about this new humanistic movement, but I think maybe we need a realistic utopia as well, realistic utopia of secure and inclusive world. And if I think about this realistic utopia starts with good practices. We have these good practices. For example, you mentioned this non-violence resistance now in the context of war. That we have these practices. And these practices are very important for solidarity in society, for help each other, for international solidarity. But there are another form of these good practices. There are different practices of horizontality, mutual support, and help each other. There is about documentation, war crimes, and providing a variety of assistance to Ukrainian defenders and to migrants, if we speak about migrants. And we can think about these good practices, for example, on the level of the feminist foreign policy. And there are very good idea proposed by Anna-Lena Baerbock to advocate for greater participation by women and marginalized groups in inclusive peace processes. There is about combating sexual and gender-based violence in armed conflicts. And there is about humanitarian arms control. For example, what is very important in the societies, democratic societies, which are supporting now Ukraine, there is very important, but this control, arms control, is the question for society. And I think that we have this idea that good practices, ideas for good practices and some good practices in this context, and we can develop these good practices, and there is maybe the ground start for another inclusive and secure world.
There's many questions, many thoughts floating around, but I think to go back to the key struggle you seem to convey here is like, are we able to think that utopia right now? And also, that you disagree that it can depend, and that's probably why I'm not a theorist. Because I think, to go back to that initial thing, like otherwise it becomes depersonalized and decontextualized. I really believe in the value of that one principle must not hold across all situations, but it should be able to be adapted. Yet maybe if we do take the humanistic vision, and if we do say, no, then it's about fundamental human rights, and it is about being able to live each other in a democratic, peaceful way. And I think it goes back to the very initial panel of, depending on how you interpret ni videre, you end up at a different answer, right? Either it's no ever again any type of war, or it is never again fascism. And then in the Ukrainian case, it is very obvious, and you hinted at that just because there is a ceasefire or a peace agreement would not mean peace for the people in occupied territories. There's enough proof of even concentration camps, right? So it would be erasure of these people and that nation. So it has to be able to depend. And for me, when you say, are we able to think that? I think the challenge, and we discussed this yesterday briefly, it's about, are we able to hold two different thoughts at the same time? And actually, if we were smart about this, then we managed not to say that all this feminist thought has been completely obsolete, but that we were pointing at the structures that were leading to this violent escalation. So the thinking still holds true. The thinking of, for example, taking Russian feminists seriously 10 years ago, taking violent abuse by regimes against human rights as an early warning signal, and not engaging in business, not building pipelines, then maybe you do not empower and embolden them. So it's not as if we have to completely toss it out and say all of this is useless. It is about saying right now, this has to be defended, like we have to ensure the livelihood, but all while also then not allowing states and certain parties, by the way, to exploit that, as we are seeing, like all of a sudden right-wing populist parties are increasing arms budgets, and not for the right reasons, and are very much also, let's say, waving on Putinist rhetoric, very much against democratic institutions within our countries. So, yeah, I think it's about enduring that ambivalence for me.
Now, I mean, thank you all. It was really, what I find very important is that we are capable to talk about this. That's the first thing. And that not to then, as I was talking about this one identification, also not to be identified with, I don't know, Putin followers or that kind of thing, which when you want to try to think peace. But I also, and this is going to be the last question for me, and then I will open it for the audience. I guess we're all tired now. And also this talk is not an easy one to start or to end anything with, although it is the talk that has to start and end things. I'm wondering, Leandra, you're absolutely right with what you say. I agree with you. And we are now seeing the effects of things which were there brewing for a decade at least, or longer. We in anti-gender are absolutely aware of that through and through. But I am thinking, Einstein was radical. I mean, I'm with him, obviously. He was radical. He said, we need to give up on sovereignty of the nation states. That would, for me, be a kind of post-national state, to give up on sovereignty and to do a complete disarmament. So we have a world, in fact, in which there is nuclear arms. They are controlled. We know who has how many, but they are kind of sleepy. They're dormant. Why are they not just, destroyed for decades? Then I want to give us a local example. In Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, in the whole region, the resolution 1325 was an enormously important resolution when it appeared in 2001. I guess we all have a clue what I'm talking about. It's about women in armed conflict. And as we were having a decade behind us of an armed conflict, and a very strong anti-militarist movement, anti-nationalist movement as well, and not just in Serbia, that's very important, and Montenegro for that matter. I mean, it's very important for me to emphasize that there was a hope that some of the knowledge produced based on those practices in that one last decade are going to be put in practice now with this UN resolution. However, what we got in the next decade was not anti-militarism, anti-nationalism, but many more women in arms. So army or police women. And is this a preparation for peace? Obviously not, right? It's more like, we are not going to do a gender equality, a proper one, more women in the army, more women with guns. So the last question, and I'm stopping with that, is Paula gave me a Schlagwort for this, is do we have to choose, but also Olga with the new humanistic movement idea of freedom, do we have to choose between life and freedom? And how life and freedom, of course, I mean, it's we were told very often in philosophy, among other places, that life is very often, opposite to equality. You said sometimes one needs to choose freedom, even if the cost is life. I mean, so in the end, it's basically the whole panel is, I'm asking the same question: do we need to make that choice? Can we imagine a world in which such a choice would not be imaginable, where we are going to have a kind of radical equality, and also as free human beings, but not when life is the cost? We have to be alive as well, to be free and to be equal.
I certainly can imagine the world that you just described, but it's useless to say, so far from the world that we are living in. So there are no ready solutions, and there shouldn't be any universal answer to these questions, because these are the decisions that are one's only, that belong to a person who can choose sometimes freedom over life. That doesn't mean that is a recommendation for someone else to do something similar, or to be a hero that we spoke about, to be looked upon. Actually, as we all know, sometimes there are worse things than that. So.
At the slogans, at the placard of Iranian protest, there were 3 words: life, freedom, women. It means women tried to combine, to bring together these 2 words, but yeah, there is a question that sometimes it doesn't work, but the idea to bring this dimension together is stronger today, and there are different dimensions. We see in this war that there are these horizontal praxis, communities, and the human rights agenda, and so on. And maybe we need more understanding how it works today to make all these practices, good practices, stronger. And maybe it will help to win this war for Ukrainians.
If you are fine, do you want?
Yeah, just a word on disarmament, maybe, and I won't go into the beast of 1325, otherwise we will stay for 1 more hour. But on disarmament, I think there it's also, again, this is such a massively missed opportunity, like with Ukraine, right? It was hinted at yesterday evening's talk, but that was massive, that Ukraine, unlike Belarus and Kazakhstan, which both also inherited warheads, they didn't inherit the control systems, but they had everything to become, all three, a nuclear power. Kazakhstan and Belarus gave that up, gave in quite easily, but Ukraine negotiated hard for 3 years. And there's a fascinating book by Mariana Budjerin that just came out, and it's called Inheriting the Bomb. And through the archives, she really looks at what motivated decision makers and citizens to go along with that big step. And she really says, because Ukraine wanted, at that time, we're talking the 90s, to be recognized as a democratic state, and because it believed in an international order that has norms, right? And for me, that is actually still, of course, it's a difficult story to sell now, but it could be such a powerful story if you end up proving that that did not come at the cost of life in the end. So, but at the end of the day, we are having a UN system where Russia as a nuclear power has a veto power, and we still need to find a solution now where Ukrainians will feel safe enough with that kind of neighbor. And therefore the utopia, as you said, is just, I can imagine it on paper, but I can't imagine it proposing it right now.
It's time for questions or comments or closing thoughts, please.
Thank you. I just feel triggered to say something about the post-terrorism and post-nationalism, since I brought it up. Olga has written, Olga's book, by the way, is called The Revolution Has a Female Face, playing with Svetlana Alexievich, the title of Alexievich's book, which unfortunately in English is called, I think, The Unwomanly Face of War. But which would then be the war doesn't have a female face, and she's describing the Belarusian attempt at building a new nation and fighting a revolution through the women that are in the leading positions of that and are playing key roles. So she's redefining, while doing that, the idea of heroism, because against exactly those women who are doing this are the old, very malely coded heroism concept. In Ukraine, I talked to the investigative journalist Natalia Gumenyuk, who is a leading advocate for Ukraine, also internationally, and we talked about the heroism thing, and she describes it as Ukraine started out with this classical concept of male and personal heroism, captured in the Heavenly 100 that died at the Maidan, portrayed over and are still, of course, revered, to the insight that the heroes are, for example, nurses and doctors, because what we need in order to fight this war is a functioning normal society with health care that can take care of wounded soldiers and keep life going and so on. So it's a completely redefining the heroism as one goes, and in that story it's also clear that what is very often described as ugly nationalism is an extremely positively coded nation-building project trying to build a common society. as a what you call civic nationalism. So what I meant when perhaps this is a good thing was not necessarily, okay, let's go back to, you know, the old concept, but redefine them. And what Ukraine might be helping us do is to do exactly that. That was my point.
Shall we maybe collect? Do you have immediate thoughts? Yeah.
Hello. You mentioned at the end that there are more women in arms despite attempts to, because of the situation, etc., in police and in the army. I wanted to ask if there are more women in such positions, do you think they can bring some different approaches into the police and army operational activities? Any thoughts on it?
I will leave you to answer this question if you want, of course.
I mean, I would have also a comment back on the new heroism. I think that one is something we have also seen with other nation buildings, right? That feminists then try to really bring that experience to the fore and to also have it recognized. And it is the same in the struggle to basically just make people realize that our economies are essentially care economies. And if you only think in terms of productive, in strict productive terms, then you are erasing what actually nurtures us and keeps us alive. And yet it doesn't really work. And so, to be honest, I can see that there is a potential, but until I see monuments erected that feed that type of heroism, I'm not buying it yet. But that also goes back to my point of Ukrainian feminists know this. They know this very well. And so they are their own, their own very critical watchdogs. And I think it's also telling that only 1 year later, because the first year was so much dedicated to making their voice heard abroad, now they have created a Ukrainian feminist network, which I recommend you follow, where they do start pushing their own government, really critically, because they are afraid of what type of reconstruction will follow and how their experiences will be erased once they are no longer useful. So that is one, and that goes also to the question of women in the army, right? So, and of course it goes back to the conflict of if you don't want any coercive means, then and I still believe in that. That is not, having armies is not what's going to liberate us, right? And one criticism of feminists with 1325 is also that this was not supposed to make war safer for women. However, and that is just a short comment I'm going to make, it is also in research we have seen that sometimes the experience of armed conflict is a path for certain women to exceed new roles, right? But I don't think it will fundamentally change armies, or the fact that coercive means is not what will create peaceful societies. So if that is the only thing we are pursuing, inserting women in armies, and not saying, okay, but actually we need control over arms and disarm, then it's a futile act.
It's great that you and also Olga mentioned COVID and those essential workers, and now Karl-Henrik with nurses and doctors. I mean, but let us just be reminded that was just, 3 years ago? Those workers, the trash bin dumpers, I mean, they were for the first time probably in the history of trash bin dumping recognized as essential, and not just them, but 3 years later, who cares about trash bin dumpers? And also the nurses or the doctors, what is theirs? I mean, not just in here or in this part of Europe, that, but wherever in the world. We forget with such enormous ease what was and what should be essential in a way. there was a question.
Yes, thank you. First, I'd like to thank you so much for this panel, because it really raises so many questions and gave me so much thoughts to think about. I'm coming from educational sciences, and I heard some phrases related to education, such as knowledge production, that we produce a lot of knowledge in relation to conflict and peace. And then Paula said, if there is a future. And I feel lately we really struggle with imagination, not even to imagine a world without war, but even the future. And I feel like our imagination has been robbed by all these narratives regarding the future. So it's difficult to imagine, and then it's difficult to act. So my question would be, I'm very curious on your stance on that. In the beginning of 2000, the peace education was very important in the region. But somehow, due to, we all know, neoliberalization and buzzwords such as upskilling and measuring and so on, it became somehow obsolete. So what's your stand on, well, first we need to imagine there is a future if we want to work on education. So what would be the goals? What would be the content? What would you do with peace education if we think that could be one way to create such a society that we cannot even imagine? Thank you.
Please. Paula, I can imagine that you have something to say on that one.
Yeah, thank you for the question. If I believe in anything, it's education. I work in education, and that's my true passion and my vocation. But let me share with you the story about civic education in Montenegro. Civic education was, it should be a subject that in comprehensive way introduce to the students the issues like alphabet of political and civic literacy, both in elementary school and in the high school. Not all high school ever. It was only meant for the gymnasium in Montenegro, and but it was in elementary school, which was really important. But the civic education was introduced as a subject in, I think, 2007 in Montenegro, and we still, for high school, don't have any educational materials, except some publication of some NGOs and so on. Today we don't have civic education in elementary schools anymore. And the status of this subject is really obsolete, because you don't have enough educated, sensible, and motivated educators to introduce these issues with passion, to present them as relevant to everyday life of all of us. So peace education also, in my opinion, should be a part, a model or something like that within the civic education, but planned and implemented in a whole different way, because this is just a superficial, how should I put it, compromise with the need to educate children for participatory citizenship. We have to check the box, and that we did it, and we see what are the results.
The question is about peace
education.
Peace and education. In Belarus, in Minsk, before 2020, my college, together with partners, developed such an anti-platform where different values were connecting with each other, and these values were not discrimination, human rights, gender rights, gender equality, ecological consciousness, and peace building was a part of this. And in our understanding, this peace building was about communication between people, not violent communication between communities, and understanding that from below, from this not violent communication, we can create then the peaceful world. And I think that, I support that, or I hope that there is such understanding that these very important values are interconnecting, and that we need to struggle for this interconnection of these different values. But maybe, I don't know, we still have now online courses for Belarusians in Belarus as well, but it's offline to organize something in Belarus. It's impossible now because of state terrorism against society. But I think it's important everywhere. Now I think it's not only for Belarus, but other places.
Do you have, no? Well, if there is no other ideas, questions, comments, then I just want to say that we started yesterday at our first panel with, or ended the first panel with the talk on the textbooks and what they gave us, or what they didn't give us, and who used those textbooks here in the Balkans, even though it was a very, very great idea to try to do this kind of historical archival work and try to figure out a kind of common history that can be taught. And maybe that would foster friendship, solidarity, solidarity of shaking. Am I right? Yeah. And now we're ending up with that, not in the brightest of tones, I would say, because as Maya said, when we talk about education, we do talk about the future. I mean, what we saw is that what we do have in our schools, at Montenegro being the example, but not just Montenegro, we see that the idea of peace is somehow, we know everything about it. It's obsolete. So I would also remind us of what we heard yesterday at the second panel, that the peace that we are having is probably not a peace at all. Negative peace is not exactly peace. It's very intangible or very tentative or very problematic. And as we saw this morning with this Balkan Peace Index, this region is not exactly a peaceful one. So I really think that, as I said yesterday at the opening, that we decided on a good place to start these conversations. I really think that we did something which was the idea of this meeting, and that is to bring together people who do not speak very often to one another. I really believe that people from the wider Balkan, so not just Western Balkan or former Yugoslav spaces, but then also people who come from Belarus, Russia. Sergei left, unfortunately, already, and we had our Ukrainian, Boris Varga, and also the people from the German-speaking countries to somehow make this conversation possible. I would say that we managed to definitely hear one another, and I hope this is going to lead to some other conversations, because as I said at the beginning of this panel, war is mute. No conversations are there. There is no language and no whatever rational, if also rational is good. I'm also not sure about that, but let me stop here. Maybe I see that Eileen, do you want to say something for the end of the workshop, or Karl-Henrik? Both of you?
Yes, both of us. First of all, a fantastic applause for this panel. But I just want to take the opportunity to, with two hats on, express my gratitude. First of all, as a guest and participant of these events, extremely rewarding from the two really impactful introductory statements by you, Adriana, and by Gazela, up until this remarkable panel, where I will take a lot of things with me, but perhaps above all, Leandra, you're as the privilege to be part of your struggling with something that we're actually all struggling with in this way. It was a privilege. I'm really, I take so much with me from these days, and it's different to have these discussions here than to have them in Vienna or in Basel or in Berlin or wherever, and this you can feel that. So as a guest and as a participant, I want to really thank you for this. And as a partner in crime, as the, representing Debates on Europe, especially to Adriana, Gazela, and to Maria, for a marvelous time leading up to this as well. And you came to us with this, and we're grateful for that. Thank you.
To take over the more official part of this. The Debates on Europe came here the last time in 2014 with a conference which partly took part here as well. So it's a touching moment, and it's a more touching remembering what we exchanged through these days. So the conference in 2014 had the title, What We Talk About When We Talk About Europe. It was focusing on Serbian perspectives. What we talked about here now was a lot of war, and I'm very, very thankful that not only, but especially in the last panel we were talking about as well, about peace and perspectives, which is very necessary for all of us. And a picture of peace which came into my mind these days is a picture of a garden. So peace as a garden is something we have to take care on constantly. It's nothing which is growing itself or blossoming itself. So, and I'm so happy about all the participants who accepted the invitation to come here, who were ready to exchange their experience. And I hope very much that we all keep on working on this garden, that we all are ready to exchange our experience, our knowledge, and that we all work on welcoming the more neighbors and people as possible for all of us. Thank you very much to all and the audience.